They said it had never happened before on live television. A defendant walking into Judge Judy's courtroom and trying to have the judge herself fired. But that morning, under the bright studio lights, the impossible became real. Karen stood there, a middle-aged woman in an expensive beige jacket and a smirk that could slice through glass. Her voice cracked through the room like a siren. "This show is a disgrace," she shouted. "I want this woman removed right now." The audience froze. Even the bailiff, so used to the chaos of small claims drama, stopped mid-step. And Judge Judy's expression? It didn't flicker. Not even once. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Judy leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes locking on Karen with a calm so sharp it felt colder than anger. "Removed?" she said softly, her voice steady but carrying like thunder. "You're in my courtroom, madam. The only person being removed today is whoever forgets that," the audience murmured, sensing something rare. Judge Judy wasn't just defending her bench, she was defending the integrity of justice itself. Karen didn't back down. She slammed a folder on the plaintiff's table. "I have complaints filed. I know people at the network," she barked. "If this court had a real system, someone would hold you accountable." She jabbed a finger toward Judy, trembling with a mix of arrogance and fear. For the first time in years, the courtroom cameras caught something that didn't look staged. A real confrontation that wasn't about money, but about pride. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses and folded her hands. The silence grew so tight you could hear the hum of the lights overhead. "Mrs. Parker," she said, her tone precise and surgical. "You walked in here thinking this show would bend to your will. But you forgot one thing." Judy paused, her eyes narrowing. "When justice is real, no producer, no complaint, and no tantrum can fire it." Karen froze, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. The audience shifted, realizing this wasn't an episode anymore, this was history. Judy reached for the phone beside her bench, her voice calm but final. "Since you believe I answer to someone else," she said, dialing a number, "let's call the Chief Judge of Los Angeles County and confirm who runs this courtroom." The audience gasped. Karen went pale. She had walked in to humiliate Judy. But Judy had just turned the courtroom into a live reckoning. If you think Judge Judy's about to stay quiet, hit subscribe right now, because what she says next will silence the entire courtroom. The courtroom was electric. Every camera light blinked, every whisper felt amplified. Karen's confidence faltered for a split second, but her pride caught her before reason could. She scoffed, flipping her hair as if trying to reclaim control of the scene. "You think you can scare me by calling someone?" she said, her voice trembling under the weight of forced arrogance. "I know the Chief Judge, he's a friend of mine." The lie cracked in her throat like glass. Judge Judy didn't answer right away. She waited, just long enough for the silence to choke Karen's bravado. Then she leaned forward, elbows resting on the bench, voice calm and sharp. "Then you won't mind if I put him on speaker," she said. The audience erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Judy's hand hovered over the phone, but she didn't dial yet. Instead, she studied Karen the way a surgeon studies a patient before the first incision. "Tell me," Judy said, her tone slicing through the air. "What made you believe this courtroom was your stage? Did someone tell you that tantrums make truth louder?" Karen tried to respond, but Judy's question cut through her interruption. "You see, this is the problem with pride. It always mistakes a microphone for a megaphone." The crowd murmured. Even the cameraman had forgotten to blink. Karen grabbed her papers, waving them in the air. "This show is rigged. You humiliate people for entertainment. I have every right to call for your removal," she screamed, her voice cracking under the pressure. Judy's lips pressed together. There was no anger, only a controlled quiet that made her next words echo twice as loud. "You came here to win a case," Judy said, "but you're losing your dignity instead." For a moment, even Karen stopped. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was silence. Her arrogance was peeling away in front of millions. The bailiff stepped forward, subtly ready, his presence heavy but quiet. Judy gestured for him to stop. She didn't need force. Her words were enough. Then Judy did something unexpected. She smiled. "You know, I've met your type before," she said. "People who believe rules exist to be bent, as long as they're the ones doing the bending." Karen blinked, uncertain if this was still about her or something bigger. "You call it fairness when it benefits you and corruption when it doesn't. But justice, Mrs. Parker, doesn't check your politics before it stands its ground." Karen's face flushed. Her voice fell into a whisper. "You can't talk to me like that." "I just did," Judy replied. The audience burst into stunned laughter, half disbelief, half relief. The tension snapped, but the moment didn't lose its edge. Judy finally picked up the phone. The weight of that gesture turned the air to glass. "Bailiff," she said, "get me the Chief Judge's office." Karen's bravado drained out of her like water from a cracked vase. "You're not really doing this on air, are you?" she whispered, stepping back. Judy didn't even glance her way. "This is your request, isn't it?" Judy said, her eyes fixed on the phone as it began to ring. "You wanted accountability. Let's give you all of it." The phone clicked. A voice answered on the other end, low and formal. "Chief Judge Hamilton speaking." The courtroom turned into a vacuum of silence. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt distant. Judy's tone didn't change. Steady, calm, composed. "Good morning, Chief Judge. This is Judith Sheindlin. I have a woman here who believes she can fire me from my courtroom. I told her we could settle that directly with you." The audience collectively gasped again. Karen's face went white. Her hand shook as the phone's speaker carried Hamilton's puzzled voice across the room. "Excuse me," he said. "Someone thinks they can remove you?" "Apparently," Judy said. Her eyes never left Karen. "Would you like to explain yourself, Mrs. Parker?" Karen stumbled forward, lips trembling. The cameras zoomed in. She looked small now, fragile, exposed, and desperately wishing she hadn't spoken. I just wanted to say the show was unfair," she stuttered. But the Chief Judge cut her off. "This isn't how the justice system works, ma'am. You're out of line." The crowd exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath the entire time. Judy sat back, a subtle victory in her stillness. The lesson wasn't about power, it was about restraint. Karen slumped in her chair. The papers in her hand fluttered to the floor, meaningless now. "And Judge Judy?" She didn't smile, didn't gloat, she simply said, "Now that that's settled, let's return to your case." The audience erupted in applause. The courtroom cameras zoomed in one last time on Karen's face, a portrait of arrogance turned to regret. Judy adjusted her robe and looked toward the audience. "Court isn't where you come to demand power," she said. "It's where you learn who really has it." The applause slowly faded, but the echo of what had just happened lingered like thunder after lightning. Karen sat frozen, the sting of humiliation crawling across her skin. For years, she had built her identity on the illusion of control, talking over others, twisting truths, manipulating sympathy. But in front of Judge Judy, that illusion cracked in full view of millions. Judy didn't look at her right away. She was busy reviewing the papers that had fallen to the floor, calmly reshuffling them, the way a teacher might clean up after a misbehaving student. Then she said, without raising her head, "You know, Mrs. Parker, there's a difference between speaking your truth and mistaking noise for justice." The courtroom stayed silent. The bailiff watched from the side, his usual smirk replaced by quiet admiration. Karen opened her mouth, but her voice came out faint. "I was just trying to be heard." Judy finally looked up. "You were heard," she said. "You were given more airtime than most cases get in a week. But hearing and listening aren't the same thing. And what you wanted wasn't understanding, it was victory." Karen swallowed hard. She could feel every camera still aimed at her. The audience leaned forward, not out of cruelty but curiosity. They had just witnessed pride meet its consequence, and they couldn't look away. "Let me tell you something," Judy continued, her tone softer now but just as cutting. "Every time someone tries to make a spectacle out of justice, they remind us why integrity still matters. You don't fix the system by shouting at it. You fix it by standing in it even when it humbles you." Karen nodded faintly, but her eyes glistened. For the first time, the audience saw not defiance but confusion. A woman suddenly realizing she had turned her pain into performance. Judy signed the case file and handed it to the bailiff. "Dismissed," she said firmly. But before the gavel fell, she looked straight into the camera. Her gaze steady, deliberate, almost personal. "There's a lesson here for anyone watching. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the truth." The gavel struck. The sound rippled through the studio. Karen lowered her head, the weight of silence louder than any verdict. As the credits rolled, audience members stood one by one, not in mockery, but in quiet respect for what they had just witnessed. Outside the courtroom doors, reporters were already gathering, microphones ready, waiting to turn the confrontation into tomorrow's headline. But Judge Judy didn't pause. She walked past them with the same calm she had shown on the bench. For her, it wasn't about winning. It was about reminding the world that justice never trembles before arrogance. And somewhere behind those glass doors, Karen Parker sat alone, replaying every word that had just stripped away her pride, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that silence can be the loudest answer of all. The clip of Judge Judy calling the chief judge spread like wildfire within hours. By the afternoon, social media was flooded with headlines. "Judge Judy puts arrogant defendant in her place and live on air." But inside the courtroom, Judy wasn't done yet. She had more to say, and she knew the lesson hadn't fully landed. Karen sat stiffly, trying to salvage some shred of control. Her eyes darted around, seeking sympathy from anyone who'd meet her gaze. But every face, audience, crew, even the bailiff, reflected the same quiet awe. She had underestimated the woman in front of her. What she saw now wasn't just a TV judge, it was the embodiment of principle. Judy leaned forward slightly. Her tone had changed. No longer sharp but steady and deliberate. "Mrs. Parker," she began, "when you shouted that this show was unfair, what you meant was that it didn't favor you. That's not injustice. That's accountability." Karen's throat tightened. "I just wanted respect," she muttered. Judy nodded slowly. "Respect is earned, not demanded. And you earn it not by noise but by grace when you lose." The courtroom was silent again. That holy kind of silence that only comes after truth has landed. Judy continued, her words pacing like a heartbeat. "I called the chief judge because you believed power could be borrowed. You thought if you threatened loudly enough, the world would bend. But the truth, Mrs. Parker, is that authority doesn't bend, it's carried." Karen's eyes watered. "Are you saying I was wrong to speak up?" she asked quietly. Judy softened. "No, I'm saying you spoke before you thought. There's a difference between courage and chaos. You chose chaos." The audience exhaled. The moment had shifted from confrontation to lesson. The cameras captured Karen's trembling hands, the papers now forgotten beside her. She wasn't the villain anymore, just human. The kind that makes mistakes on camera and can't edit them out. Judge Judy reached for the case file again, but this time her tone gentled. "The world doesn't need more loud people," she said. "It needs steady ones. People who can speak the truth without screaming it." She paused, glancing at the audience. "And sometimes the ones who scream the loudest are simply asking to be seen." Karen blinked, a tear finally spilling. "I didn't mean to," she started. But Judy lifted a hand, stopping her with quiet authority. "I know," she said. "But now you've been seen for the wrong reason. What matters is what you do after that." For a long moment, Judy said nothing. The silence stretched until even the cameras seemed to hum softer. Then she closed the file. "Case closed," she said gently. "And maybe, Mrs. Parker, lesson opened." The courtroom applauded again, but softer this time. Not for victory, but for understanding. Karen wiped her face, whispering something to herself. Maybe it was apology. Maybe it was relief. Judy stood, gathering her robe, and turned toward the crowd. "Let this be a reminder," she said, voice echoing with purpose. "The law isn't about power. It's about order. And order starts when we stop mistaking pride for principle. If you believe respect still matters, comment 'respect matters' below, because the next moment in this courtroom will change how everyone sees Judge Judy forever." The next morning, headlines dominated every screen. Clips of the courtroom confrontation looped endlessly. Judge Judy's calm defiance, the phone call, the silence that followed. But beyond the viral noise, something deeper had shifted. People weren't just talking about entertainment. They were talking about dignity. Karen Parker woke up to hundreds of messages, some mocking, some sympathetic, but most filled with one line: "You picked the wrong judge." Her name had become a lesson. Every time she refreshed her phone, a new clip of her trembling voice or Judy's steady reply flooded her feed. She shut it off, but the echo of Judy's words, "Respect is earned, not demanded," stayed in her mind like an unanswered prayer. Meanwhile, Judge Judy sat in her dressing room, reading letters from viewers who saw in her not just a judge, but a reflection of balance in a world that had forgotten what it looked like. One letter came from a teacher in Ohio who wrote, "When she raised her voice, I saw my students. When you stayed calm, I saw what they could become." Judy folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her briefcase, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Later that week, Karen appeared on a local talk show. Her tone was quieter now. "I went there to expose someone I thought was arrogant," she admitted. "But I ended up exposing myself. I thought being loud meant being strong. Turns out strength whispers." The host nodded, the crowd silent. For the first time, Karen wasn't performing. She was processing. Back in Los Angeles, Judy resumed filming, unaffected by the headlines but aware of their weight. On set, a new sign had been placed behind the cameras, words the crew had printed overnight. "Justice doesn't need applause to be heard." Judy smirked when she saw it, but said nothing. The message spoke for itself. During the next taping, Judy addressed the audience before the case began. "We all saw what happened last week," she said. "It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about what happens when pride meets patience. And patience wins." Applause filled the room, not the frenzied kind, but a steady rhythm of agreement. Even the bailiff, who'd seen hundreds of episodes, nodded in quiet pride. "You handled that like scripture," he whispered when the cameras cut. Judy chuckled softly. "No," she replied. "Like law. The real kind." That afternoon, Karen visited a community center in her hometown. She sat among volunteers sorting donation boxes, her hands trembling as she taped shut the flaps of a cardboard box labeled Veterans Relief. A woman beside her recognized her. "Aren't you the lady from that Judge Judy episode?" Karen nodded. The woman smiled kindly. "You handled it rough, but you came out real. That counts for something." Karen smiled faintly, a humility in her eyes that hadn't been there before. For the first time, she wasn't running from her reflection. She was learning from it. And somewhere in another studio, Judge Judy signed off another episode, her gavel echoing softly. Less a sound of judgment, more a reminder of balance returning to the world. By the end of the week, the story had moved beyond television. It had become a cultural mirror. News panels debated it, morning shows dissected it, and millions of people online were still quoting Judy's line, "Respect is earned, not demanded." But what surprised everyone most wasn't Judge Judy. It was Karen. She hadn't disappeared the way most people do after public humiliation. Instead, she started showing up. At charity drives, food banks, even a mentorship program for women rebuilding their lives after mistakes. When a local reporter caught up with her at one of these events, Karen didn't run from the microphone. She just smiled faintly. "I used to think loudness meant strength," she said. "Now I know quiet people can move mountains too." Her words went viral again, but this time not as ridicule. People began calling it the Karen turnaround. The same internet that mocked her was now watching her evolve in real time. She started using her platform to speak about accountability, empathy, and what she called the discipline of listening. Meanwhile, on Judge Judy's set, the energy was different. Crew members spoke with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that what happened that day wasn't just television. It was testimony. Judy moved through her schedule like clockwork, as sharp and focused as ever. But even she couldn't ignore how far the moment had rippled. A week later, during a break between cases, she received a call from Chief Judge Hamilton, the same man she had put on speaker in front of millions. Judge Scheindlin, his deep voice came through, carrying the faintest smile. "That was quite the civics lesson you gave America." Judy chuckled softly. "I didn't mean for it to become one. I just refused to let arrogance dress itself up as justice," Hamilton laughed. "You may have reminded the whole country why we wear these robes. Not for power, but for service." Judy leaned back, her expression thoughtful. Then maybe the chaos was worth it. Later that evening, Judy's producer entered her office with a handful of fan mail. "You've been called a hero, a mentor, and a legend in the past week," he said with a grin. "Even Karen's been writing back to people. She thanked you publicly." Judy raised an eyebrow. "Thanked me?" He nodded. "Said you held a mirror up to her life, and for the first time she didn't look away." Judy exhaled slowly, her usual wit replaced by quiet reflection. Then maybe she finally understands that a courtroom isn't where you fight the truth. It's where you face it. The following Monday, Judy returned to filming. The bailiff, standing by with his usual grin, whispered, "Ready for another viral moment, Your Honor?" Judy smirked. "Let's hope this one's just about the law." But the energy that day was different, richer, quieter, wiser. When the next plaintiff walked in, trembling with nerves, Judy smiled kindly and said, "Don't worry, dear. We've all had our lessons lately." That episode aired 3 days later, and viewers noticed something new. Judy wasn't softer, she was steadier. Every word carried the weight of what the world had witnessed. When the credits rolled, she didn't need a moral speech. Her silence said enough. Meanwhile, Karen found herself receiving messages from strangers thanking her for owning up instead of hiding. She started mentoring young women who'd faced public backlash, helping them rebuild their lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who tried to fire Judge Judy is now teaching accountability, one magazine headline read. But for once, Karen didn't mind the irony. She laughed at it. One evening, she wrote an email addressed to Judge Judy herself. She didn't know if it would ever be read, but she typed it anyway. "You didn't embarrass me. You freed me. You made me realize that fighting authority isn't rebellion. It's sometimes insecurity dressed as pride. I'm sorry and thank you." She hit send, closed her laptop, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not out of victory, but peace. And across town, as Judge Judy wrapped another episode, her assistant walked in holding an envelope. "This one's from Karen Parker," she said. Judy opened it quietly, reading the words with a faint smile. No cameras. No audience. Just a moment of truth between two women who finally understood each other. Judy folded the letter and whispered to herself, "Case closed." Weeks later, the world had moved on, but the story still lingered like a quiet echo in people's minds. Clips of the courtroom had faded from the trending pages, but the message had taken root in conversations, classrooms, and courtrooms alike. For Judge Judy, it was just another case in a long career of teaching through truth. But for Karen Parker, it had been the turning point of her life. On a cool Monday morning, the network arranged a follow-up interview. Judy agreed reluctantly at first. "I don't like reruns of Justice," she'd said, but eventually smiled. "Maybe this one's worth it." The interview opened with footage of that famous moment. The phone call, the silence, the gavel. Then the camera returned to the present, where Judy sat composed, her usual robe replaced by a soft gray suit. She looked directly at the interviewer and said, "That day wasn't about embarrassment. It was about reflection. Everyone deserves a chance to grow, if they're brave enough to face the truth." Halfway through the broadcast, the interviewer revealed a surprise. Karen had joined the conversation remotely. For a second, Judy's eyes softened, though her tone remained steady. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "I hope the world's treated you fairly since our last encounter." Karen smiled faintly through the screen. "It has, Your Honor, because I stopped fighting the world and started fixing myself." The audience applauded softly. It wasn't sensationalism anymore, it was closure. Karen continued, "You taught me something I didn't even know I needed to learn. I thought winning an argument meant proving I was right. But now I know it means learning when to listen." Judy nodded. "Listening is the hardest thing people never practice," she said. "But when you do, it changes the sound of everything around you." The interviewer looked between them, realizing the moment was no longer about controversy but connection. Two women, once divided by pride and perception, now mirrored each other's strength in different ways. When the cameras shut off, Judy leaned toward the crew and said quietly, "That's the first time a courtroom taught me something back." The producer smiled, knowing the world would feel that line long after the show ended. As the credits rolled, Judy's voice returned one last time in narration. "In the end, justice isn't about punishment, it's about perspective. And sometimes the verdict we fear most is the one we deliver to ourselves." If Judge Judy's strength and grace inspired you today, hit subscribe and share this story. Because real authority isn't loud, it's lasting. Nobody in that courtroom could have imagined they were seconds away from witnessing the most unthinkable act in Judge Judy's 30-year career. It began like any other small claims hearing. Papers shuffling, quiet whispers from the gallery. Judy adjusting her glasses as she scanned the file in front of her. The defendant, a red-faced woman in a floral blazer named Karen Mitchell, sat rigid at the table, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the judge like a hawk stalking prey. The tension felt strange, heavier than the usual nervous energy. But no one understood why. Not yet. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Judge Judy lifted her gaze. "Ms. Mitchell," she began coolly, "this is your opportunity to tell the truth. Use it wisely." Karen's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl, and that was the last moment the courtroom felt normal. Because Karen wasn't planning to defend herself. She was planning to arrest the judge. "Ma'am," Karen said loudly, her voice slicing the air like broken glass, "you are in violation of the Constitution, and as a citizen of the United States, I hereby place you under citizen's arrest." The room went silent. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just stop sound, it crushes it. The gallery froze mid-breath. The plaintiff blinked in disbelief. Judy's pen paused in the air like even the laws of motion had been suspended. Then Karen stood. Her chair screeched back. She reached into her purse and pulled out a set of plastic zip ties. The bailiff instinctively stepped forward, but Karen was already moving, pointing her finger at Judge Judy like a sheriff out of a fever dream. "You think you're above the law?" she shouted. "The law answers to me now." Gasps ricocheted through the room. Someone in the back whispered, "Is this real?" The cameras kept rolling, but the world inside that courtroom had stopped spinning. Judge Judy didn't flinch. Her expression didn't even twitch. She just stared, utterly still, her eyes like cold steel. And yet something flickered. A flash of pure disbelief. In 30 years on the bench, she had never seen anyone dare this. Karen took one more step toward the bench, closer than anyone is ever allowed, and raised the zip ties like handcuffs. And in that instant, before the bailiff lunged, before order shattered, before chaos ripped through the courtroom, one haunting question gripped everyone watching. What happens if Karen actually touches her? Because if she did, everything about courtroom justice could change forever. If you think nothing can shock Judge Judy anymore, you're wrong. What happened next left even her speechless. Tap like right now so you don't miss the moment this courtroom erupts. For several suspended seconds after Karen's words cracked across the courtroom, nobody dared breathe. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, invisible but suffocating. Judge Judy didn't move. The bailiff's hand hovered near his holster, not because he planned to use it, but because instinct had taken over. The gallery had gone ghost still, as if they collectively understood that this wasn't just a tantrum. This was something far darker. Karen's voice trembled as she kept speaking, but her eyes burned with certainty. "You think this room belongs to you," she said, pointing at the bench. "It belongs to the people, and I'm the only one in here brave enough to enforce the Constitution." No one laughed, because it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. Judge Judy's courtroom had seen arrogance, anger, entitlement, lies, but never this. Never someone declaring that the ultimate symbol of law and order was suddenly the criminal. And buried under the shock, a new, colder thought began to crawl through everyone's mind like ice. What if she isn't stopped? What if this idea, that anyone with enough rage and delusion can arrest a judge, spreads? What if this moment, caught on camera, becomes fuel for others who believe law is optional, and chaos is their right? Even Judy's courtroom, fortified by decades of authority, now felt fragile. One reckless woman had cracked the foundation, and the room knew it. And it wasn't just Judge Judy's dignity at stake. It was the courtroom itself. The idea of order, the gavel, the oath, the quiet expectation that justice would be protected inside these walls. All of it trembled as Karen stood there, zip ties gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a mockery of handcuffs. The plaintiff, a young man who had come here only to settle a lease dispute, sat paralyzed. His life had already been turned upside down once by Karen's defiance of their agreement, and now he watched her try to upend the very system that could make it right. If she succeeded, if she could even touch the bench before being stopped, then the outcome of his case, and every other case that followed, might not matter at all. Because if a courtroom isn't safe from chaos, then justice becomes just another game to be shouted over, and that thought chilled everyone who had ever believed this room was untouchable. The bailiff's jaw flexed as he slowly stepped closer, his boots whispering on the tile. His eyes stayed locked on Judy, waiting for the slightest nod to move. Judy still hadn't blinked. She wasn't frozen out of fear, she was calculating, measuring. She knew something the rest of them didn't. That this moment wasn't just about her reputation. It was about precedent. What happens today becomes tomorrow's excuse. If Karen so much as brushed the hem of Judy's robe, it would be played endlessly on screens across America. Proof that authority can be mocked, shoved, manhandled like a prop. And Judy knew this courtroom would never recover from that image. A soft creak of leather echoed as the court reporter shifted. Her face pale, fingers still on the keys but unmoving. Even she understood it. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was contagion. A spark that could set every fragile thread of respect in every courtroom ablaze. Karen's words rose louder, almost shaking now. "This is a citizen's arrest, Judge Scheindlin. You are operating under maritime law, and you are impersonating a judge. You have no legal standing." The words were nonsense, but it didn't matter. Nonsense can still burn down the world if people believe it with enough fire. And Karen's fire was spreading fast. Outside, somewhere beyond the thick courthouse walls, life went on. Cars honking, phones buzzing. The hum of a city that trusted its courts to keep the chaos contained. But inside this room, that illusion had cracked. The audience wasn't watching a legal dispute anymore. They were watching something far more dangerous. The moment law itself was challenged, Judge Judy's silence became its own weapon. Her stillness screamed louder than any gavel strike, but under her cold exterior, even she could feel the weight crushing her shoulders. If she reacted too soon, the world would see her as rattled. If she reacted too late, they would see her as weak, and weakness, even imagined, is fatal to a judge's power. Somewhere in the gallery, a phone camera flashed. A photo already flying toward social media, a single frame that could mislead millions. Judy, sitting as a woman, stood above her, holding restraints. To those who didn't understand the law, it could look like the unthinkable had already happened, that Karen had taken control. And once that lie is born, it lives forever. This was the real danger, the hidden stakes no one had spoken aloud. If this moment spiraled, it would not just humiliate Judge Judy. It would give millions of angry strangers permission to declare themselves the law. That was what the room felt, bleeding in from the edges like cold water. The sense that justice itself was one reckless lunge away from collapse. Hours before the courtroom would gasp in disbelief. It was just another Tuesday morning on set. The bailiff had polished the brass nameplate on the bench. The court reporter sat upright, her fingers poised above the keys. Judge Judy entered briskly as she always did. Black robe crisp, lace collar glowing under the lights, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. The gallery rose, then sat. Routine, predictable, safe. Only Karen Mitchell didn't sit like the others. She lowered herself into the defendant's chair as if she were taking a throne, not a seat. Her chin tilted high, her hands folded like she was the judge and Judy was the accused. Even her breathing was theatrical, slow, deliberate, every exhale echoing louder than it should have. She never blinked. She didn't need to. Her eyes were locked on Judy with the fixed, defiant focus of someone who had come here not to defend herself, but to deliver a reckoning. Her case was simple on paper. A broken lease, unpaid rent, a furious landlord who claimed Karen left his property in chaos. The plaintiff's folder bulged with photos, contracts, receipts. But when Judge Judy asked Karen to present her side, something was already off. Karen didn't open her folder. She opened a manifesto. "This courtroom," she said, her voice honeyed and sharp, "is operating outside its jurisdiction." The words fell like ice into boiling water. Judy's pen paused mid-note. The gallery tilted forward, curious. It sounded rehearsed, too smooth, too confident. Judy had heard every excuse under the sun, but something about Karen's tone carried a quiet threat. "Ma'am," Judy replied, her voice flat and surgical. "You signed this lease, did you not?" Karen didn't answer the question. She smiled. "I stand under common law, not your maritime codes," she said. A ripple of laughter tremored through the back row, quickly stifled when Judy's glare sliced their way. Judy inhaled slowly. "We are not on a boat, Ms. Mitchell. Try again." Karen tilted her head, her grin growing wider like a child who had planned a prank no one else understood. She began pulling papers from her bag, not evidence, but printouts of constitutional amendments, scribbled charts, even what looked like a laminated citizen's oath card. The plaintiff stared, bewildered. Judy didn't blink. She just tapped her pen once against the desk. "Focus," she ordered, "or I'll end this hearing." But Karen wasn't losing focus, she was sharpening it. Her words grew faster, louder, straying from leases to corporate tyranny, then to sovereign citizen jurisdiction. The gallery shifted in their seats, some exchanging looks, others pulling out phones. They didn't know it yet, but the air in that room had already changed. The hearing wasn't about the lease anymore, it was about who was in charge, and Karen had quietly decided it wasn't Judge Judy. The air in Judge Judy's courtroom had gone brittle. Like glass about to break, Karen's words had been spiraling for minutes, faster, louder, further from reality, and every eye in the gallery followed them as if tracking a spark near dry wood. The plaintiff sat motionless, shoulders tight, lips pressed white. Even the bailiff, who had stood like stone through 1,000 outbursts, now shifted his weight forward as though bracing for an earthquake. Judge Judy tried once more to rein it in. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice razor flat, "you have 30 seconds to answer the question or I will dismiss your case entirely." Karen's lips twitched into a smile that wasn't really a smile. "You can't dismiss me," she whispered almost sweetly. "Because you don't have the authority." And then everything cracked. Karen shot to her feet. Her chair skidded back and slammed the wall. Her purse tipped over, spilling a scatter of papers and the bright glint of plastic zip ties across the floor. The gallery gasped as one. Karen didn't notice. She was already pointing at Judge Judy with a trembling finger, her voice cracking with rage that had been coiled and waiting all along. "I place you under citizen's arrest," she shouted, every syllable shaking. "You are impersonating a judicial officer and I am reclaiming this court." Time didn't just slow, it disintegrated. The bailiff lunged from his post, boots thudding like war drums. The plaintiff jerked back in his chair, eyes wide. The gallery rose halfway, then froze, mouths open. But Karen kept moving, her heels pounding the tile, her hand clutching the zip ties like handcuffs, her eyes wild and glassy. She charged the bench. She actually charged Judge Judy. For the first time all morning, Judy's face moved, not with fear, but something colder, fury. Her eyes flashed, steel catching fire, as the bailiff intercepted Karen just feet from the bench. His arm wrapped across her shoulders, twisting her sideways. The gallery erupted in gasps and shouts, half disbelief, half fear. Karen thrashed in his grip, screaming legal jargon and half-sentences about corruption and maritime law, her words, dissolving into primal noise as she kicked at the air. The paper she had dropped spun and skittered across the floor like startled birds. The courtroom was gone now. What remained was chaos wearing its skin. Judy sat perfectly still, unmoving as the bailiff pinned Karen's arms to her sides. But her silence didn't read as shock anymore. It read as judgment, ice-cold surgical judgment, like she was watching a structure collapse and mentally writing its obituary. No one clapped. No one spoke. The room was silent but for Karen's ragged screams echoing against the wooden walls, and even they were fading as the bailiff dragged her back, step by grinding step. A woman had just tried to arrest Judge Judy, and for a few terrifying seconds it almost felt like she might succeed. If you think the chaos ended here, it didn't. What happened next stunned even Judge Judy. Comment chaos if you're still watching with your jaw on the floor. When the bailiff finally forced Karen down into the corner of the room, the noise didn't just stop, it died. Her screams collapsed into broken murmurs, fragments of legal jargon spilling from her lips like cracked glass. The gallery stayed frozen where they stood, halfway between sitting and fleeing, eyes wide and unblinking. Even the plaintiff's pen had fallen from his hand, rolling across the table without anyone noticing. For a moment it didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a church after lightning hits the steeple. Judge Judy had not moved. Her hands were still folded, her back still straight, her face as cold and unreadable as stone. But her silence was deafening. The air seemed to bend around it. The bailiff's heavy breaths filled the void as he held Karen's trembling arms pinned to her sides. No one spoke. No one dared. Somewhere in the back row a woman dabbed tears from her eyes as if waking from a nightmare. A man near the aisle let out a slow, shaky exhale, realizing he'd been holding it the whole time. Karen's head slumped forward, but her eyes still glimmered with wild defiance. It was over, but not really. The damage she'd done was still echoing in every stunned heartbeat in that room. Judge Judy finally blinked. Just once. And somehow that tiny motion felt louder than any gavel strike. For a long, lingering moment after Karen's screams faded, the only sound was the bailiff's slow, steady breathing and the faint rustle of papers still trembling on the floor. Judge Judy did not speak. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at Karen. She simply sat, still regal, and impossibly composed, as if the entire eruption had only confirmed what she had always known. That chaos burns itself out, and law survives by standing perfectly still. Then Judy moved. One finger tapped the bench. Once. Sharp. The sound cracked through the room like a starter's pistol and everyone jolted. The bailiff froze mid-motion. The gallery sat as if pulled down by invisible strings. Even Karen stilled, her lips parting just enough to let out a faint, disoriented gasp. "Release her," Judy said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it sliced through the room like chilled steel. The bailiff hesitated, glancing back for confirmation. Judy's eyes didn't flicker. "Release her," she repeated, softer. Slowly, the bailiff loosened his grip. Karen's arms fell to her sides like dead weight. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just stared, blinking rapidly like someone who had woken up in a place she didn't recognize. Judy leaned forward, folding her hands atop the bench. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, every syllable polished and cold, "you have just done something no one has ever done in this courtroom, and something no one will ever do again." Her words didn't rise. They sank, heavy, final. "You attempted," she continued, "to perform a citizen's arrest on a sitting judge of a legally convened court of law. You stormed this bench with zip ties, screaming conspiracy theory word salad while endangering my staff, my litigants, and the dignity of these proceedings." She paused, letting silence settle like dust on broken glass. "You did not fail because the bailiff restrained you," Judy said, her eyes narrowing. "You failed because you never had power here to begin with." A ripple shuddered through the gallery. Not applause. Not relief. Just breath. Released all at once as though they had been holding it since the chaos began. Karen's lips quivered. Her hands twitched on her lap. She seemed smaller now, the blaze in her eyes dimmed to embers. But Judy wasn't done. "You believe this courtroom is a stage?" Judy went on, voice still perfectly level. "That you can rewrite the rules, rewrite reality, and crown yourself judge by declaring it loud enough. That is the delusion of tyrants. And tyrants do not walk out of here victorious. They walk out escorted." Karen's shoulders flinched like she'd been struck. Judy turned to the bailiff. "Remove her from this courtroom. She is now in contempt of court. She will be fined. She will be barred from re-entry for 90 days. And her case," Judy looked back at Karen, her gaze sharp enough to cut marble, "is dismissed with prejudice." The bailiff nodded silently. Karen's mouth opened, a small strangled sound escaping, a final thread of defiance trying to breathe. But Judy's gaze pinned her like a nail. "Not one more word," Judy said softly. "You've wasted enough air." That was the first moment Karen truly stopped. The bailiff stepped forward, gently taking her elbow. She didn't resist. Her heels clicked faintly as he guided her toward the side door, each step echoing like the slow toll of a bell. The gallery stayed silent, eyes following her as if they were watching a ghost fade from the world. At the threshold, Karen turned back, eyes flicking to Judy's bench, still searching for something. Dignity maybe, or revenge, or just the proof she had existed. But Judy was already looking back down at her. Papers. She didn't give Karen even the dignity of a last glance. The door closed with a dull click, and only then did Judge Judy look up. Again, at the gallery, the court reporter, the plaintiff still trembling in his seat. "Order," she said simply, not shouted, whispered, yet somehow it carried like thunder. The word rolled through the room like a spell breaking. People inhaled again, shoulders dropped, eyes blinked. Even the fluorescent lights seemed brighter, as if they too had been dimmed by the chaos. Judy set her pen neatly beside the case file, as though placing the final stone atop a monument. "This courtroom," she said, "runs on law, not tantrums." Her tone didn't waver. Not an ounce of heat, not a flicker of triumph, only precision, polished and merciless. She wasn't angry anymore. She was finished. And in some strange way that was more devastating than fury, because rage can be dismissed. But cold certainty is absolute. The plaintiff, still pale, nodded shakily. The court reporter's fingers finally moved, keys clattering again. Life bled back into the room in fragile threads. Yet a strange reverence lingered, like the hush after a thunderstorm that leaves the world trembling but cleansed. Judge Judy reached for her gavel but didn't use it. She didn't need to. Order had already returned, not with a bang but with her silence. When the door finally closed behind Karen Mitchell, it didn't sound like wood meeting wood. It sounded like the world exhaling. The gallery sat frozen, still half expecting her to burst back in. But she didn't. She was gone, swallowed by the very system she had tried to overthrow. The plaintiff sagged back into his chair, shoulders trembling with relief he didn't even try to hide. The court reporter's hands hovered, unsure if this moment belonged in ink or in silence. And at the bench, Judge Judy simply reset her papers, her expression carved from stone, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. But everyone in that room knew something had. They had just watched a woman try to arrest Judge Judy, and they had watched the law itself decide whether it would bend or hold that news spread like wildfire before the next case even began. Someone had caught it on their phone. The video hit social media within minutes, the caption screaming in all caps, "Karen tried to arrest Judge Judy." By the hour's end, it had racked up millions of views. Clips looped across timelines, Karen rising, zip ties flashing, the bailiff's tackle, Judy's face frozen in unflinching calm. People couldn't look away. Some laughed. Some seethed. Most just stared in stunned disbelief, realizing they had just watched the closest thing to anarchy ever allowed inside a courtroom, and watched it fail. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered like storm clouds, microphones ready for a soundbite Judy never gave. She left through a side corridor, her robe trailing behind her like a shadow. No statements. No explanations. Just silence, because her silence had already said more than words ever could. By evening, the court released a formal statement. Karen Mitchell was found in contempt, fined and banned from the premises for 90 days. She would not be allowed to appeal her case. It was over. Legally, publicly, completely. But something deeper remained hanging in the air, heavier than the headlines. For the people who had been in that room, it wasn't just a viral clip or an outrageous moment. It had felt like watching a sacred line be crossed and then redrawn, sharper than ever. They had seen what happens when someone decides law is optional. And they had seen how quickly the world can tilt when respect shatters. But they had also seen something else, something far rarer. They had seen Judge Judy not fight to reclaim her authority, but simply refuse to let it be stolen. That was what lingered most. Not the shouting, not the zip ties, not even the tackle, but the stillness, the way she never raised her voice, the way her silence roared louder than chaos. And maybe that's why people couldn't stop replaying it. Because buried inside the spectacle was a truth they didn't expect to feel. Authority doesn't scream. It endures. Long after the viral storm faded, the viewers who watched from living rooms and office screens found themselves thinking about her final words. The ones she said so softly, yet they echoed louder than the chaos ever did. This courtroom runs on law, not tantrums. It wasn't just a dismissal of Karen, it was a warning. A reminder that respect isn't granted. It's defended. In a world addicted to outrage, Judy had shown something stronger than rage. She had shown restraint. And in doing so, she had proven why no amount of noise can dethrone true order. That night, the viral video flooded comment sections around the world. Some were furious at Karen. Some celebrated Judy like she'd just won a war. But most were simply quiet, shaken, awed and grateful that someone still stood where lines are supposed to stay. Unbroken, because if Karen had succeeded, even for a second, it wouldn't just have humiliated Judge Judy. It would have told the world that the gavel can be grabbed by anyone loud enough to reach for it, but she didn't succeed. Because Judy never moved. And in that stillness while she won, if this moment left you speechless, Hit like to stand for courtroom sanity. Subscribe to see more jaw-dropping moments from Judge Judy's bench. And comment, "Law wins," if you believe chaos never stood a chance against her. Nobody in that courtroom was ready for what happened next. The moment Karen hurled her cat, yes, her cat, across the plaintiff's table in a burst of rage, the audience gasped, the bailiff froze, and even the cameras hesitated. But Judge Judy didn't. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just stared at Karen with the kind of silence that makes grown men rethink their entire lives. And within 30 seconds, that silence turned Karen from a screaming storm into a shaking, tear-soaked mess begging for mercy. But the story of why she did it and what Judy said next would leave everyone questioning who the real victim was. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Karen Mitchell, 43 years old, thought she had it all figured out. She came into that courtroom with her expensive shoes, perfect curls, and a sense of entitlement so thick you could bottle it. She wasn't there for justice. She was there for performance. Her claim? That her former neighbor owed her money for emotional damage caused by a cat scratching her luxury handbag. But there was one small problem. The cat wasn't the neighbor's. It was hers. Judge Judy had seen hundreds of liars walk into her courtroom, but this one felt different. Karen didn't just want to win. She wanted to humiliate. Every time Judy tried to clarify the facts, Karen interrupted, rolling her eyes, twisting the truth, and using her favorite line, "I pay your salary." The audience chuckled nervously, waiting for Judy's famous comeback. But this time the judge stayed unusually quiet, too quiet. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and let Karen keep talking herself deeper and deeper into the hole. And then, the breaking point. Judy asked one simple question that cracked the whole story open. "Ms. Mitchell, if the cat belongs to you, why does the veterinary bill have your name on it?" The color drained from Karen's face. She fumbled her papers, stumbled over her words, and tried to laugh it off. But the cameras caught everything, the guilt, the arrogance turning into panic. Desperate to regain control, she lashed out, scooping up her own cat from its carrier and throwing it toward the bench as if to prove something. The cat screeched, the courtroom erupted, and Judy's gavel struck once, sharp, final. That's when it happened. The transformation no one saw coming. Judy didn't yell. She didn't need to. She simply stood, fixed her eyes on Karen, and said 9 words that echoed through the studio like a verdict from heaven. "You just proved everything I needed to know." Karen froze. The courtroom fell silent. And in that moment, every ounce of false confidence melted into fear. Her voice broke, her hands trembled, and for the first time all day she looked small. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were witnessing the fall of someone who thought she could outsmart justice. If you're still watching, comment "Justice served" below, because what happens next will show exactly how Judge Judy turns arrogance into accountability. The bailiff was still frozen mid-step, his hand hovering near the bench like he wasn't sure whether to comfort the cat or arrest its owner. The animal, thankfully unharmed, darted into the corner of the courtroom, its frightened eyes reflecting the chaos Karen had created. But amid the gasps, whispers, and murmurs rippling through the audience, one sound rose above all, the sharp, deliberate scrape of Judge Judy's chair sliding back. That sound alone silenced the room. Judy didn't raise her voice, but everyone knew what was coming. Karen's breathing quickened as Judy stood up, adjusted her robe, and stared her down, not with anger, but with something far worse, disappointment. "Ms. Mitchell," Judy began, her tone calm, almost surgical, "you've just turned a civil case into a moral one. Do you understand what you've done here?" Karen's lips trembled. I didn't mean—" Judy cut her off with a single raised hand. "Don't lie again. Not after what I just saw." The courtroom was so quiet that you could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights above. Even the cat's nervous breathing could be heard faintly from the corner. Judy's eyes didn't leave Karen's face once. Not when she tried to explain, not when she muttered excuses, and not when she reached for her purse like she wanted to disappear. It was as if Judy was holding up a mirror, forcing her to see what everyone else was seeing. An entitled woman unraveling under the weight of her own arrogance. "Let me tell you something," Judy said finally, her voice low but carrying through the room like a verdict. "You don't disrespect this courtroom. You don't disrespect me. But most of all, you don't harm an innocent animal because you can't handle the truth." The crowd's silence broke into a quiet murmur of approval. One older woman in the audience shook her head, muttering, "That poor cat." Another whispered, "She's done for." Karen's eyes darted nervously from the judge to the audience, realizing the tide had turned. Her carefully crafted image, the confident homeowner, the victim of injustice, had crumbled into dust. Her makeup looked smudged now, her hair disheveled from all her dramatics. The same people who'd gasped at her confidence were now looking at her with contempt. "Do you know what that animal felt when you threw it?" Judy asked. "Fear, confusion, pain. And that, Ms. Mitchell, is exactly what you've been trying to make everyone else feel here today." Karen swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like that." Judy tilted her head. "Then tell me what it was like. Go ahead, tell me how tossing a living creature proved your point." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The tears that she had fought so hard to hold back finally began to spill. She pressed her palms against her face, but it was too late. Her mascara streaked down like dark ink, truth written in humiliation. Judy walked back to her chair, slow and measured. "When you walked into my courtroom, you thought you could perform your way into victory," she said, settling into her seat. "But what you don't understand, Ms. Mitchell, is that justice doesn't bend for theatrics. It bends for truth." The camera panned to Karen's trembling hands. Her breathing came in short, shaky bursts. It was the first time she wasn't trying to talk over someone else. The silence forced her to sit with her own reflection, the kind of silence Judge Judy used like a weapon sharper than any word. "Here's what's going to happen," Judy said. "You're going to apologize to the plaintiff, to this courtroom, and to that animal. You will also pay the veterinary bill since it's your cat and your negligence that caused harm." Karen blinked rapidly. "But Your Honor—" "No!" Judy snapped, her voice now steel. "You've said enough." The gavel hit once, sharp as a heartbeat. "Do it." Karen turned toward the plaintiff, her former neighbor, a quiet woman who had sat through the chaos in stunned silence. Karen's voice cracked. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to—" The woman didn't reply. She simply nodded, eyes glistening, not out of pity but out of disbelief that it had come to this. Judy leaned forward. "Now, Ms. Mitchell, look at me." Karen hesitated, then met Judy's eyes. "What you did today," Judy said softly, "wasn't about money or handbags. It was about control. But you just learned the hardest lesson in this courtroom. Control doesn't come from shouting. It comes from accountability." The audience murmured again, this time in agreement. Judy's tone softened slightly. "And for what it's worth," she added, glancing toward the frightened cat now being comforted by the bailiff, "I hope you understand that mercy starts with humility." Karen nodded through tears, whispering, "Yes, Your Honor." Judy tapped her gavel again, the final note in a symphony of consequence. "Then let's begin your redemption right here." The words hung in the air, stern but strangely redemptive. The audience applauded softly, a rare moment in Judy's courtroom where justice felt both harsh and healing as the credits of the moment began to form. The camera still on Karen's tear-streaked face. "Judge," Judy's closing expression, said it all, calm, collected, and entirely unshaken. She had turned chaos into clarity and arrogance into remorse. "If you believe Judy handled that perfectly, comment, no one judges like Judy." Below, because the next part reveals how she taught Karen a life-changing lesson about what real mercy looks like. When the courtroom emptied that afternoon, the echo of Judge Judy's words still hung in the air. Karen sat alone at the plaintiff's table, staring at the scuffed wood where her cat's carrier had been. Her mascara was ruined, her pride shattered, and for the first time in years she had nothing clever left to say. The cameras had stopped rolling, but the weight of that silence of her own actions stayed heavy in the room. Judge Judy gathered her notes, calm as ever, but before stepping away from the bench, she paused. The bailiff looked at her confused. Judy didn't usually linger after a verdict, but something in Karen's defeated posture made her hesitate, not out of sympathy but out of principle. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice echoing through the now quiet courtroom, "you may have embarrassed yourself on national television, but that's not the real punishment. The real punishment is realizing that every person in this room saw who you really are, and more importantly, so did you." Karen lifted her eyes slowly, her voice trembling. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," Judy nodded once. "You were trying to win at any cost. But sometimes the cost is your dignity. And when that's gone, you've got nothing left to protect." The words hit like a gavel. They weren't angry. They were surgical, precise, the kind that doesn't just punish but teaches. Karen lowered her gaze, unable to respond. Her entire case, her attitude, her performance, it had all been built on pretending to be the victim. But in the end, she'd exposed herself as the aggressor. That realization burned hotter than any public humiliation. Judy stepped down from the bench, her robe swaying slightly as she walked past the tables. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been doing this a long time. I've met people who've lost everything, money, homes, family, but the ones who recover are the ones who admit when they're wrong." Karen's throat tightened. "And what if it's too late?" Judy stopped beside her, looking down with that mix of authority and wisdom that made millions tune in every day. "It's never too late to tell the truth," she said. "But it's always too late to pretend you didn't need to." The bailiff opened the door, letting the hallway light spill into the courtroom. Karen stood up slowly, wiping her face with trembling hands. She picked up her empty carrier, the faint sound of her cat meowing from down the hall as the crew returned it to her. For once, she didn't storm off. She just walked quietly out the door. No arrogance, no performance. Just a woman who finally understood that winning wasn't worth losing herself. Judge Judy turned back toward the bench, her voice low but resolute. "That," she murmured to the bailiff, "is what justice looks like." And in that quiet courtroom, long after the cameras stopped, justice felt less like punishment, and more like truth finally finding its voice. The next morning, the entire country was talking about it. Clips of the trial flooded social media. 10-second videos of Karen's meltdown, slowed down and replayed with captions like, "Never mess with Judge Judy" and "Instant karma" on live TV. Even news outlets ran short segments about it, calling it the most shocking courtroom moment of the year. But inside Judge Judy's chambers there was no celebration. Judy sat at her desk reading a stack of letters that had arrived overnight. Some praised her, others condemned her for being too harsh, but she didn't care for either. Justice to her was never about applause. It was about truth. Still, she couldn't deny it. Something about that woman, that case, had stayed in her mind longer than most. Meanwhile, across town, Karen Mitchell sat in her car outside a pet clinic. Her cat, Bella, was inside getting checked for stress and bruising. The same cat she had thrown in anger. The same one that had stared at her with frightened eyes when she realized what she'd done. She hadn't slept all night. Every headline, every meme, every notification reminded her of the same truth Judge Judy had said out loud. She'd become her own punishment. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her sister read, "Karen, you need to apologize publicly. It's everywhere." Karen threw the phone aside and buried her face in her hands. She had built her entire identity on being right. Now the world only saw her as a woman who lost her temper and her humanity in front of millions. Back in the courtroom building, Judy walked through the hallways, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her bailiff, Bird, caught up to her. "Ma'am, you saw the morning coverage?" "I did," she replied without breaking stride. He smirked. "You broke the internet again." Judy shot him a look, the kind that ended conversations before they began. If people need entertainment, they can watch sitcoms. This courtroom is for consequences. Still, there was something in her eyes, a faint glimmer of concern. She paused near the exit, looking out at the reporters waiting near the gates. "She'll be all right," Bird said softly. "Maybe," Judy answered. "But only if she learns from it. Shame fades, character doesn't." At the clinic, Karen waited in silence until the vet emerged holding Bella's carrier. "She's fine physically," he said gently, "but she's frightened. Take it slow. Talk to her softly. She needs to trust you again." Karen nodded, tears threatening to spill again. "She doesn't trust me anymore, does she?" The vet hesitated, then answered honestly, "Not yet." That word, "yet," echoed in her mind. Maybe that's what Judy meant. Maybe this wasn't the end. Hours later, Karen returned home and sat on her couch, Bella's carrier beside her. The cat hesitated before stepping out, sniffing the air cautiously. Karen whispered, "I'm sorry." The cat didn't respond, just turned away and curled up on the rug. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Meanwhile, in a production meeting later that afternoon, Judy's producers discussed the ratings spike. "That episode's trending everywhere," one said, grinning. "We should replay it next week." Judy interrupted. "No, not that one." The room fell silent. "Why not?" asked the producer. "Because that wasn't a show," she said flatly. It was a mirror. Her words hung heavy in the room. Everyone understood. She didn't want to celebrate humiliation. She wanted people to remember the message. Later that evening, Judy was walking to her car when she saw a small envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. It was handwritten, no return address. She opened it and read, "Judge Judy, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know you were right. I needed to see myself the way the world did. I'm starting over. Karen Mitchell." Judy folded the note and slipped it into her purse. Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. She looked up at the fading sunset and muttered, "Maybe she learned something after all." The next day, during a new case, Judy glanced briefly toward the empty plaintiff's table where Karen once sat. She felt that same quiet pride she rarely admitted, the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the gavel doesn't just deliver punishment. It delivers a chance for people to rebuild themselves. Karen's story would soon fade from the headlines, but in that courtroom, something permanent remained. Judy's silence that day, the pause between justice and compassion, had turned a viral moment into a moral one. And while Karen might never erase what happened, she'd carry the lesson for life. That the cruelest thing a person can lose isn't a case or a reputation. It's respect, both from others and from themselves. And that was exactly what Judy had given her the chance to earn back. A week passed. The storm of headlines had slowed, but the ripples of Karen's outburst still moved quietly across the internet. Strangers debated her character, psychologists analyzed her behavior, and clips of Judge Judy's icy stare had been turned into viral reaction memes. Yet, away from the noise, something unexpected was happening. Karen was changing. For the first time in years, her mornings were quiet. No constant phone calls, no dramatic social media posts, no desperate attempts to prove herself right. She had deleted every account that fed her ego. Instead, she spent her days volunteering at the same animal clinic where she'd brought Bella after the incident. The staff didn't know who she was, at least not at first, and she preferred it that way. She just showed up, swept the floors, and cleaned kennels. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. One afternoon, as she refilled food bowls, an older volunteer smiled at her. "You handle the cats real gently," the woman said. "Most people rush through it. You take your time." Karen smiled faintly, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "I used to rush everything," she admitted quietly. "Didn't realize what I was breaking in the process." The woman didn't press. She just nodded with the quiet wisdom of someone who'd seen a lot of broken things get fixed over time. And as Karen stroked Bella, now calmer and more trusting, she realized something simple but profound. The same patience she'd denied others was what she now needed most for herself. Meanwhile, in her office miles away, Judge Judy sat reviewing cases when her assistant entered. "You might want to see this," he said, handing her a printed news article. The headline read, "Former viral defendant volunteers at local shelter. Judge Judy was right." Judy read the short piece. It wasn't dramatic, no quotes, no interviews, just a photo of Karen kneeling beside a group of rescued cats, her face softer, her posture humbled. Judy didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly. "People can surprise you," she murmured, setting the paper aside. Later that evening, Judy filmed her closing statement for an upcoming episode. But instead of her usual fiery monologue, her tone shifted, measured, reflective. "Some people think justice is about punishment," she said, looking straight into the camera. "But real justice is about awakening. It's about realizing who you are when no one's watching, and deciding if that's who you still want to be." Her words echoed beyond that courtroom. Karen heard them too, playing on her small kitchen TV as she washed dishes that night. She paused, listening, and whispered under her breath, "Thank you, Judge." And somewhere deep down she knew, this time she wasn't trying to win anyone over. She was just trying to be someone she could finally respect again. Months later, Judge Judy walked through a quiet Los Angeles park, where a charity event for rescued animals was being held. Rows of cages lined the paths, filled with cats waiting for new homes. She'd been invited as a guest speaker, not because of her fame, but because her message from that viral case had sparked something bigger, a national conversation about accountability and compassion. As she approached the podium, she noticed a familiar face among the volunteers, Karen Mitchell. She was wearing a plain white shirt with the shelter's logo. No makeup, no performance, just her. Judy's steps slowed, but her expression remained unreadable. When Karen looked up and met her gaze, she froze for a moment, then smiled. Not nervously, not desperately, but with quiet sincerity. After the event, Karen approached her cautiously. "Judge Judy," she said softly, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Judy folded her arms. "I don't usually make house calls," she said dryly. Karen chuckled, just a breath of laughter. "I deserved what happened that day, but I also needed it. You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost, in perspective." Judy studied her for a long second, her sharp eyes searching for any hint of the old arrogance. But it wasn't there anymore. Karen's voice carried humility, not defense. "I started working here after the case," she continued. "At first I thought it was penance. Now it feels like purpose." For once, Judy's tone softened. "That's how you know you've learned something. The lesson sticks when no one's forcing you to repeat it." Karen nodded, her eyes misty but calm. "I still think about what you said. That control doesn't come from shouting, it comes from accountability." "You were right," Judy gave a small nod. "You don't need me to say it, but I will anyway. I'm proud of you." The words caught Karen off guard. She blinked, smiling through her tears. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judy turned to leave, her robe flowing behind her as she headed toward the parking lot. But just before stepping away, she looked back. "Ms. Mitchell," she called out, "keep doing things right. Not for me, not for anyone watching, but because now you know how it feels when you finally do." And in that simple exchange, both women understood. Justice wasn't just served that day. It had endured. Weeks after the charity event, Judge Judy filmed her final episode of the season. The courtroom was quiet. No loud plaintiffs, no smirking defendants, no chaos. Just Judy, her gavel, and a small audience that didn't know they were about to witness something different. As the cameras rolled, Judy leaned forward, her voice softer than usual. "You know," she began, "people often ask me what justice really means. They think it's about winning a case, proving someone wrong, or walking away feeling superior. But it's not. Real justice," she paused, tapping the bench lightly, "is about what happens after the verdict. It's about whether a person walks out of this courtroom better than when they came in." Her crew exchanged glances. This wasn't scripted. But Judy wasn't talking to them. She was talking to the millions of people who had seen Karen's case and felt something deeper than entertainment. That day, she continued, a woman made a terrible mistake. The world laughed at her. But what mattered most was that she didn't stay that person. She learned, she grew. That's what justice looks like when it works. Meanwhile, in a quiet shelter across town, Karen was cleaning out the cat enclosures. Bella followed her around like a small shadow now. Trust restored, bond rebuilt. The other volunteers called her the Cat Whisperer, never realizing how poetic that nickname truly was. As Karen finished her shift, she sat outside under the fading orange sky, scrolling through her phone. A clip from Judy's new episode appeared on her feed, the very speech airing live. She listened, every word wrapping around her heart like closure she hadn't known she needed. When Judy said, "Real justice is when a mistake becomes a lesson instead of a label," Karen felt tears roll down her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't cry out of shame, but gratitude. She whispered to Bella, "I think she was talking about us." The cat purred softly, resting in her lap. Across the city, as Judy removed her microphone and set down her notes, Bird walked over. "That was one for the books," he said quietly. Judy gave a faint smile. "No," she said, glancing at the empty witness stand. "That one was for her." The lights dimmed, the set emptied, and for a moment, the courtroom that once witnessed chaos now carried only peace. If you watched this till the end, comment, "Justice lives on." Because true justice isn't just a verdict in court. It's the moment someone finds the courage to change.